Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to uncover a terrifying moment in Hana's story. While she is quietly selling vegetables at the market, she suddenly realizes that people are passing around flyers searching for her, and the man behind it all is Nam, who is desperately trying to track her down. With danger getting closer and closer, Hana must escape before someone recognizes her and reports her. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Hana stepped out of the house just as the first pale light spread across the fields. The village was still quiet, wrapped in the soft silence that comes before the day truly begins. She carried a woven basket on her arm and a small hoe in her hand, walking along the narrow dirt path behind the house. The grass was wet with morning dew, brushing against her ankles as she moved quickly toward the vegetable patch. She did not like leaving the house so early, but lately she had learned that the earlier she worked, the safer she felt. Fewer people on the road, fewer chances of running into someone who might recognize her or ask questions she could not answer. Hana knelt down beside the rows of vegetables and began cutting fresh mustard greens and water spinach. The leaves were still cool and damp from the night air. She gathered them into small bundles, tying them carefully with thin strips of grass. Her hands moved quickly, almost automatically, but her eyes kept drifting toward the path behind her. Every small sound made her pause. The flutter of birds rising from the trees, the distant creak of a wooden cart somewhere on the road. Even the rustling of wind through banana leaves made her lift her head for a moment before she forced herself to continue working. After filling half the basket with greens, Hana moved to the soft patch of soil near the edge of the field, where sweet potatoes grew underground. She drove the hoe into the dirt and dug slowly, lifting the soil with practiced care. Soon the first sweet potato appeared thick and reddish beneath the dirt. She brushed it clean with her hand and placed it into the basket. Then another, and another. Some were large and smooth. Others were small and crooked, but she kept them all. These days nothing could be wasted. Every root meant a few more coins at the market, and every coin meant another day she could survive without being forced to return to the life she had run from. By the time she finished digging, the basket was nearly full. Hana straightened her back slowly, pressing one hand against her waist to ease the ache. Sweat had begun to gather along her neck, even though the sun had only just begun to rise. She looked down at the basket and let out a quiet breath. At least today there's something to sell, she murmured to herself. After washing the dirt from her hands with water from a small jar, Hana covered the vegetables with a cloth and lifted the basket onto her arm. Then she began walking toward the market road. The village had started waking up by then. A few farmers were already leading their buffalo toward the fields. Smoke rose from kitchen fires. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed while chasing chickens across a yard. Hana kept her head slightly lowered as she walked. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her face, pretending it was just to protect herself from the sun. In truth, it helped hide more of her features. Since escaping from Nam, she had lived with a quiet fear that followed her everywhere. She knew he would not give up easily. Men like him never did. Still, Hana told herself that the village market was crowded enough to keep her safe. Too many people, too many stalls, too much noise. If she blended in with the other sellers, maybe no one would look closely enough to recognize her. When she reached the market, the place was already alive with movement. Voices overlapped in every direction. Fresh fish, just caught this morning. Sweet mangoes, 2 for 1. How much for these herbs? The smell of vegetables, fruit, smoke, and fish sauce filled the air. Buyers moved from stall to stall while sellers called out prices loudly, trying to attract customers. Hana found a small empty space beside an older woman who was arranging pumpkins in a neat row. Without drawing attention to herself, she spread a worn cloth on the ground and carefully laid out her vegetables and sweet potatoes. The greens were bright and fresh. The sweet potatoes, though still dusty, looked firm and healthy. She sat down quietly behind them. At first, she focused only on selling. A middle-aged woman stopped and picked up a bundle of water spinach. "How much for this?" the woman asked. "3,000, Hana replied softly. The woman nodded, handed her the coins, and dropped the vegetables into a basket. Not long after, an elderly man bought 2 sweet potatoes. A young mother purchased herbs for soup. Slowly, Hana's small pile of vegetables began to shrink. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a little hopeful. Maybe today would pass peacefully. Maybe she could sell everything before noon, buy a little rice and cooking oil, and return home without anyone noticing her at all. But even as she worked, Hana's attention never completely relaxed. Every few minutes, she glanced around the market. Every loud male voice made her heart tighten. Every unfamiliar face made her uneasy. She kept reminding herself that Nam would not be foolish enough to search openly in a crowded place like this. And yet, she knew Nam well. If he wanted something badly enough, he would find a way. By late morning, the sun had grown stronger, and the market noise had settled into a steady rhythm. Hana had sold more than half her vegetables. It was not a large amount of money, but it was enough to make the long morning of work feel worthwhile. She wiped sweat from her forehead and began rearranging the remaining sweet potatoes. That was when she noticed something strange. At the far end of the market, near a small tea stall, several people had gathered in a loose circle. One man stood in the middle holding a stack of papers. He handed one to a woman, then another to a man beside her. Soon the paper was passed from hand to hand. People leaned closer, studying it carefully. Their expressions changed. Some looked surprised, others curious, and a few shook their heads with pity. Hana did not pay much attention at first. Markets were full of gossip and rumors. Someone missing a buffalo, someone's daughter running away, someone fighting over land. But then she heard a woman nearby say quietly, "Poor girl, she's so young, and her mind is already gone." Another voice answered, "The husband must be worried sick. Imagine losing someone like that." Hana's fingers froze on the sweet potato she was holding. She slowly looked up. A young boy ran past carrying one of the papers. He showed it to a fruit seller, who immediately leaned closer to read it. The paper passed to another person, then another. The strange ripple of curiosity spread deeper into the market. The older woman selling pumpkins beside Hana clicked her tongue. "These days, anything can happen," she muttered. Hana forced herself to speak casually. "What are they looking at?" The woman pointed toward the group. "Some missing person notice," she said. "They say a woman ran away from home. The paper says she's mentally unstable. If anyone sees her, they should report it right away." For a moment, the sounds of the market seemed to fade. Hana felt her heart beat slow, then slam violently against her ribs. The woman continued talking, unaware of Hana's expression. "It says the family is desperate to find her. Poor husband. He must be exhausted searching everywhere." Hana's throat went dry. Across the market, someone lifted one of the papers higher so others could see the picture printed on it. Even from a distance, Hana could see the blurred photograph, and in the very next second, her entire body went cold, because the woman in that photograph was her. The moment Hana recognized the face in the photograph, The air seemed to disappear from her lungs. For a brief second, she simply stared, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. The picture was small and poorly printed, the ink uneven, the edges blurry from cheap copying, but none of that mattered. She knew that face instantly. It was her. A cold wave rushed through her body so quickly that her fingers began to tremble. The sweet potato she was holding slipped from her hand and rolled quietly onto the dirt beside her cloth. Nam. Only Nam would do something like this. Only he would twist the truth so shamelessly, turning her into a helpless, unstable woman who had run away from home. Anyone reading that paper would believe they were helping a worried husband if they reported seeing her. In one cruel move, he had turned the entire village into his eyes. Hana forced her head down immediately, pulling the edge of her scarf higher to cover more of her face. Her breathing became shallow as panic began tightening around her chest. Stay calm. Don't move too fast. If she ran now, people would notice. Around her, the market had begun buzzing with curiosity. Two women from the fish stall leaned together, whispering as they studied one of the papers. "Look at her eyes," one of them said. "She does look a little strange." Another voice nearby replied, "It says she gets confused and wanders around. The husband must be desperate." A man chuckled softly. "If someone finds her, there might even be a reward." Each word struck Hana like a small hammer. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them against her knees to steady them. The older, pumpkin seller beside her finally managed to get one of the papers passed down the line. She squinted at it, holding it close to her face. "Ah, poor girl," she sighed. "So young." Hana's heart nearly stopped. The woman turned slightly, as if about to show the paper to Hana. Instinctively, Hana lowered her head even further and pretended to rearrange the vegetables in front of her. The pumpkin seller studied the page again and shook her head. "It says if anyone sees her, they should notify the family immediately. Says she might be dangerous to herself." She paused, then added sympathetically, "Her husband must be suffering." Hana bit down on the inside of her lip to keep from reacting. Nam, suffering. The thought made something bitter twist inside her chest. But anger was useless right now. Fear was stronger. Because if even one person compared her face to that picture too carefully, everything would be over. Someone across the market called out loudly, "Has anyone seen this woman around here?" Another voice replied, "Hard to tell. The photo is too blurry." Someone else laughed. "Maybe she's hiding in the fields." Hana's stomach dropped. Fields. That was exactly where she had come from. She could not stay here. Not another minute. Slowly, trying to appear as natural as possible, Hana began gathering the remaining vegetables from the cloth. Her movements were clumsy because her hands would not stop shaking. She shoved the unsold sweet potatoes back into the basket. Then the greens. She tied the corners of the cloth quickly and stuffed it inside as well. "Leaving already?" the pumpkin seller asked in surprise. Hana forced a weak smile without lifting her eyes. I don't feel well today," she murmured. The woman nodded sympathetically. "Yes, the heat is strong today. Better go home and rest." Hana lifted the basket. It suddenly felt twice as heavy as before. 2 stalls away, a man was still holding the paper, turning it toward a group of curious buyers. "Look carefully," he said. "If anyone sees her, we should tell the husband." Another man asked, "Where did she disappear from?" "Nearby village," someone answered. "The husband says she ran away suddenly." Hana's chest tightened painfully. She stepped away from her stall. One step, then another. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground. All she needed to do was reach the edge of the market, just a few more steps, just a little farther. But then behind her, a small voice rang out. "Auntie, that woman looks a bit like..." Hana did not wait to hear the rest. Her body reacted before her mind could. She ran. The basket slammed against her side as she pushed past two startled buyers and rushed toward the market entrance. A few people shouted in surprise when she brushed past them. "Hey, watch it!" What happened? To her? But Hana did not stop. She burst out of the crowded market and onto the dirt road beyond it. Her feet carried her forward without thinking, past a bamboo fence, past a small pond where ducks scattered in alarm. Then she veered sharply off the road and ran straight into the open fields. Dry rice stubble scratched against her legs. Mud clung to her sandals. The sun burned hot above her, but she barely felt it. All she could hear was her own breathing, fast, uneven, desperate. She ran until the sounds of the market disappeared behind her. Only when her lungs began burning did she finally slow down. Ahead of her stood a small abandoned hut used by farmers during harvest season. Its thatched roof sagged slightly, and tall grass surrounded it on all sides. Hana rushed toward it and slipped inside. The interior was dim and cool. She crouched near the wall, clutching the basket tightly to her chest as if it could somehow protect her. Her heart was still pounding wildly. They know. Nam has turned everyone into his hunters. If anyone had recognized her in the market, the news could spread quickly. And if Nam was already nearby, the thought made her stomach twist. Meanwhile, back at the small house near the edge of the village, Grandma Sam stood in the doorway, staring down the empty road. The morning had stretched much longer than usual. Hana should have returned by now. Even on busy market days, she always came home before the sun grew too harsh. But the road remained empty. Grandma Sam shaded her eyes and looked again. Still nothing. A quiet worry began to grow in her chest. That child, where did she go? She muttered. After waiting another moment, the old woman grabbed her hat and stepped out of the gate. "I'll go check the market," she said to herself, already walking down the road. She did not know that at the far end of the fields, something far more dangerous was already unfolding. Along a dusty path beyond the tall grass, Nam walked slowly with two rough-looking men beside him. One of them held several remaining flyers in his hand. Nam scanned the wide fields ahead with sharp, searching eyes. "She can't hide forever," he said coldly. The men beside him nodded. They began walking deeper toward the farmland, and between them and the small abandoned hut where Hana was hiding, there was now only a short stretch of land left. Hana wakes up early and goes to the fields to pick fresh vegetables and dig sweet potatoes so she can sell them at the village market. She hopes to earn a little money and quietly return home without attracting attention. At first, everything seems normal as she sells her vegetables and talks to customers like any other vendor. But suddenly, the market becomes restless when people begin passing around flyers searching for a missing woman. Hana is horrified when she realizes the woman in the picture is her. The flyer falsely claims she is mentally unstable and ran away from home, asking people to report her if they see her. Knowing Nam is behind this lie and is desperately looking for her, Hana panics. She quickly gathers her things and escapes through the fields, while Nam and his men move closer to the area where she is hiding.